Welcome to this panel, which is called Future Shapers. My name's Danna Walker, and I'm the founder and CEO of something called Built by Us, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. For this piece, we're going to be talking about inclusion, and inclusion in terms of the ways that individuals, organisations, large or small, can make a difference. One of my favourite quotes is from the Dalai Lama. And he says, if you think you are too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. And I think that really speaks to me in terms of how each and every one of us can make a change and add to a much larger strategy. I'm delighted to be joined by three panellists from very different organisations, and I'll be leaving them to introduce themselves as part of their presentation. But just a couple of things about Built by Us. One of the things that we're doing is we're partnering with the amazing Surface Matter. We have Scott from Surface Matter here today. If you haven't visited the store, please do. I hear it's amazing. I'm going to go and see it myself. But we're partnering with them on something called the SHAPE program. And in terms of how we drive diversity and inclusion, one of the things that we do is support individuals and organisations, people who want to found their own businesses, people who want to be part of the built environment, and whether they're manufacturing, design, whatever it is, that's one of the things we do. So if you want to hear a little bit more about that, catch me afterwards and I can tell you a little bit more about it. This session is really about sharing ideas, thoughts, and hopefully some tools and tips around the things that we can be doing to make every single aspect of what we're doing more inclusive. And I'd like to introduce, first of all, Katie, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what she does and where she works.
Yeah, so I'm Katie Reed, and I'm from a modern massive construction consultancy called Akerlof. So we look at how we can embed kind of social value and improve social outcomes through modern massive constructions. That might be offsite, it might be digital technology, so it ranges from a lot of things. I guess I'm bringing the point of view from a really small consultancy, but also I'm really passionate about creating a built environment that represents everybody that comes into contact with it, because I think at the moment it's definitely not that. Working the innovative side, I'm really passionate about kind of improving it. I was actually just at an event earlier where they were saying that within factories, especially in construction, it's only 0.4% that are kind of female there. But in some factories now, kind of across kind of the sector, they're managing to get to about 40%. So I'm like, that's amazing if we can be improving things in that way through different ways of working. So yeah,
excellent, thank you. Scott, tell us a little bit about you.
Yes, I'm Scott from Surface Matter. We are driven by working with great people, and we have some amazing materials that we work with. Come see us downstairs. But we're here today to talk about us, and we partnered with them. We've been doing some studio social events, a few of those now, and we just love what they do and what they stand for. And I think one thing that we're really excited to be doing, sort of supporting over the coming sort of year, is sort of being more part of the mentor programs that you're looking to develop. And you know, we have ourselves. We have some like humble beginnings. We sort of started myself in a small room, and we've come a long way. We've got a nice team of great people, and we have come a long way, but we've still got a long way to go. And that's something that really sort of drives us too. Everything that we do is sort of geared towards sort of working with good people, like I said, our team sort of members, and I think for us as a business, you know, as we have grown, we know what the needs of our sort of growing businesses, but actually what's really important to us as we have grown is understanding what the new people that are coming, what they need to also help them grow. And so that we have a huge focus on sort of listening, learning from the people who surround us.
Thank you so much. And Stephanie, if you could say a bit about yourself and what you're doing.
Hello, hi. So I'm Stephanie Edwards. I'm an architect and urban designer, and I co-founded a design consultancy called Urban Symbiotics. And we've been lucky enough to be supported for mentorship through the SHAPE program Built by Us. But what we have really focused on, so we have been around for 5 years. My other co-founder is a product designer, so we're really focused on how can we look at looking at the built environment, from architecture to places to spaces to the public realm, and from that product design perspective. So we're really focused on that product design technique of understanding, well, we need to understand the demographic, we need to understand the users, we need to understand the visitors and customers of our spaces. So how can we understand who's in an area, decide on how we directly reach out to them, so whether that's through focus groups, representative in terms of gender, ethnicities, cultures, abilities, to really start to look at how we can create really appropriate places. And I think what's really nice about our approach in terms of looking at it from a product design perspective is it's not just about the design, it's about how do you feel when you're in the space, do you feel welcome, do you feel at home, does it reflect your identity? And we've been doing some work with the Black Cultural Archives about testing some interventions of, what are the right palette of materials to be using, and we managed to test out some interventions during COVID that has now resulted in some permanent solutions. Or we're working in Barking and Dagenham designing parameters for their ideal homes. So what does that feel like? How do people want to adapt their homes, even if they're renters, for example? You may not have as much choice, but you should be able to change, your wallpaper. You should be able to change how you use your home, whether you want it to be more focused on working, socialising, within your family. And so for us, in terms of inclusion and that space, we're really looking at how can we meet design meets people to ensure that it's really user focused.
Fantastic. So we've got 3 great panellists here looking at this from very different perspectives. And I'd like to ask you all, what do you think has been the game changer in the area that you work in terms of creating inclusion or thinking about inclusion or practicing inclusion?
I guess if I go first, from a personal point of view, it was when I realised that actually I have to be part of the change. I've got a Glastonbury bag from years ago that says, if not you, then who? And I think it's such a kind of powerful message that if I don't start to kind of question things and speak up for people, create platforms for people, and then how can things change for the greater good? Because I think as a female in construction, there's trailblazers before me that worked in a much tougher industry, that I have the responsibility to then leave behind something that's better than I found it. And I think that's something that kind of working with an Akerlof, we kind of have a saying of delivering betters, not just goods. And when you live that, I think then you start to kind of try and make change that isn't just looking at kind of creating betters in terms of program or cost. It's actually creating betters in terms of how can we create social good, and every project create that social good. So that's my
Excellent. And Stephanie and Scott, have there been any particular game changes for you? Anyone who'd like to go first?
I think for me it was sort of prior to actually being sort of involved in some sort of quite sort of toxic environments at times, and sort of seeing the impact that people's behaviour can have on people's lives within the workplace. And I think it was a case of just sort of that sort of education of learning not how to do it. I think was almost sort of just trying to do everything completely the opposite, because I saw that actually if you really just look at what the needs of the people are and actually sort of put some energy into that, there are positive results that come of it. So really just sort of seeing that what not to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You mentioned sort of language and behaviours, and I think in terms of inclusion, that's where it can start. Often people think that it's about making big speeches or making major interventions. Those smaller interventions can be so important in terms of creating great workspaces, inclusive workspaces.
It is the work environment as well. It's just sort of creating that safe space.
Safe space, I like that phrase. Do you have anything that you'd like to add, Stephanie, on this sort of game changer for you?
Yeah, I think for me the game changer, and for me it's been this real move towards co-design and co-creation and participation, and people actually feel the value of that. I think the game changer for us is that when you work with people that are completely open to really understand, to being almost naive to what the result may be, so not thinking I know exactly what I need to create, but by just being open to understand you're not going to be able to walk in someone else's shoes, so ask them what it's like to live and work in their shoes. And then you can really start to get to some really impactful designs and solutions. And I think that's been really nice for us to almost witness that change, like going together with clients, moving towards a journey of a product from the beginning to the end, but really, just looking at the really surprising solutions and things that you'd never think of as a designer, but that you're able to get from a range of different people. So for me, that's been, I think that's been good. It's a really nice shift, I think.
Yeah, and I think you make a really interesting point there about involving people at the earliest stage possible. I'm actually an architect as well by training, although I don't practice anymore. But often we would find we were in a situation where people started to be included quite late in the process. But you made the point, it really needs to be right from the beginning. Absolutely. Are there any tools or tips that you would recommend when we're thinking about building or enhancing communities or enhancing the ways that we work? Should we start with you, Scott?
Well, I think you sort of answered it before. It's like, it's actually sort of putting the people first and bringing them in at a very sort of early stage. We come from we have some quite sort of provocative messaging with our brand about sort of being proud materialists and understanding the impact that they can have on people and spaces. So actually sort of getting that sort of input from the people that actually going to use the space. Using just our studio space as an example, we call it a studio space, not a showroom, for a reason, because it's actually the design of the space was for the people that want to use it. We created a space that we knew that we wanted people to be happy in. If the people that have got to be there for 8 hours a day are happy to be there, then people that are visiting for 15, 20, 30 minutes are going to love it just as much. So I think it's really sort of understanding the needs of the people in the space.
Any tools or particular things that you're using?
Yeah, so one of the things we use specifically around social value is the value toolkit, which means that you can, from the earliest stage of the project, start to kind of set up with all the stakeholders, anyone who might come into contact with the project, kind of key metrics that you want to start tracking and targets, and then you can keep checking in on them on the whole life cycle of a project. And they can be social, they can be natural, they can be kind of to do with equity and diversity, so you can actually start to show the impact it's having along the way. And we found with that you really do start to not just get the value in the project, but then track the value and then have data that shows the benefits that your project's brought forward. And I think stuff like that kind of takes it, I think for us we're really passionate about taking it away from just cost and programme, which everything always falls down to kind of stuff that we're talking about here, which is actually about creating better spaces for the people that are there and more inclusive design that means that people want to use those spaces and feel excited about being in those spaces. And probably touching on some of the stuff that Stephanie was talking about with kind of collaborating with lots of different people to get those different ideas, because I think diversity of thought is such an important thing for us to create a world that everybody feels excited to kind of be in, and not just like when they kind of go into certain spaces, which I think we've all had at some point.
Oh, that's a lovely way to summarise it. Our sort of vision quote is a world built for all by all. That's exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about. Some of you may be familiar with social value as a concept, some of you not. But basically there's this social value act, and it's really about leveraging the power of local government, central government, to encourage more businesses, projects, etc., to really think about the social and environmental impacts that they're having through their projects. And as an architect and urban designer, you're basically kind of working around this space a lot in terms of measuring and thinking about it. Are there any tools, different tools that you're using, Stephanie?
Yeah, I think almost, for example, the tools we use are probably more of an approach. So almost that idea of front-loading a lot of the kind of resource and time at the beginning, as you said, so that you can really start to understand what people really need, or issues in an area that you may not just see on Google Earth or through some data sets. And the idea of street conversations, or having a conversation with people to understand what are their priorities. I think it's almost like that openness, like tool is being open to know this is what you may want to achieve, but understanding what are the priorities, what has the most impact, and almost ensuring that whatever the product is, or the final solution that you're going to finish with does also answer some of the pressing needs. Like, we've started to realise how important identity is. So how that may be related to colours or materiality, like whether it's like culturally specific or not using stereotypical solutions. So not always having bright colours or street art in a deprived area, because it also starts to sometimes perpetuate a stereotype that people don't necessarily haven't necessarily brought in. So I think it's just that openness, that impact on, sometimes it's the smallest things. So I'd say, the tools are always that approach of real openness and impact,
And that's a really good point about, I suppose, making assumptions and sometimes stereotyping communities. Oh, I think this community will like this, rather than actually engaging, asking those questions, because you can always be absolutely surprised by what it is that people are looking for.
I think, like, specifically to your sort of question about are we toolkit, it's one thing that we've very sort of early starting to embark on is the sort of sort of certification. And at first, when the idea of that was, we heard of it and it was floating around, it was another pay-to-play live badge to wear, but there are, as we started to sort of look into it a little bit further, really surprised by just how it was actually sort of really sort of just wanting to push businesses, like small businesses like ours, to actually do the things that we would really want to do. Like, we see it as part of like the journey that we're on. But I think the more we look at it and we're going through that process, there's actually a lot of good in there, that even if you didn't complete all the check all the points, it really is actually driving sort of positive change within small organisations. So as a framework, the more we look at it, it's actually really, really exciting.
And I think that's been one of the biggest changes. I think in the past, people have engaged with some of this as a kind of nice to do, but actually something like the B Corp framework starts to talk about measurement, it starts to talk about data, it starts to talk about impact. And it makes it part of the kind of business basic, it's not nice to do anymore, it's actually a business imperative. So great to mention that one. I'm wondering if we have any questions from the audience. Is there anything that you would like to ask? I have a microphone here and I'm happy to run over if you have any questions at all. Everybody just stares, looks around. It's okay if you don't, I've got a few more, but if you do have a question, pop your hands up and I'll come over to you. We've talked a little bit about the fact that you all come from quite small organisations, so it'd be nice actually to hear a little bit more about how many of you are there, and how you're kind of working, that kind of thing.
I can jump in. So we have a core team of 6 of us, but we like to almost expand and grow as we go, so depending where we do our work, so we're very place-based. So for example, we're doing quite a lot of work in Dagenham, as I was saying before. So we're working with communities in Dagenham, so we have employed a young person there to help us directly talk to young people, because we may not be as young as we think we are, and then work with people to, again, using other tools about having that demographic analysis, but being very clear about how do you get to certain people. They are there are structures, there are communities, and just need to tap into it in the best way. So then we might have 10 people on the street, do street conversations, turn up to different events, and so we almost have a bit of an expanding team from like 6 to 16, And also from our product designer, he's very much focused on visuals. We might do a bit of, for example, immersive space experiences to work on how you can start to really make places more inclusive. You may not be able to understand a plan, but you might be able to feel and see how a space really looks in the future. And so that's our model, to be a bit more dynamic as to how we can grow and change and adapt.
Yeah, and I think actually that really does speak to the need actually to be quite adaptive. Things are changing very, very quickly. We never know what's around the corner. And the fact that you can kind of shrink and then expand again to deal with whatever the challenges are in your project, that's amazing. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, Scott, about your setup.
So we have a team of currently 8 people, split across 2 sites. We have a studio in London Fields, where there was an inspirational space, come and see some amazing materials. And then we have our sort of hub in Rye, where we keep a lot of these materials in quite large formats. It's where we stock and distribute the materials from. So we have this sort of, we've got this balance of sort of more creative but also sort of more manual aspects of what we do. And it's amazing. We spend a lot of energy into making sure that the 2 sides collide to sort of bring different kinds of energy together. Again, just referring back to where before there was this sort of office yard sort of divide that you sort of sometimes see, and it's very important to us that actually we work together as one. And it comes back to the people. We focus a lot on the personalities and people that we surround ourselves with, and making sure that we all work together. We've actually got somebody that went on maternity leave 3 years ago now, 2 and a bit years ago, that we just sort of, she got back in touch and said, if there's anything, are you, is there, I'd love to come back, and sort of if there's any opportunity, and again, we know her skill set, we knew what she was all about, and we just sort of had to craft a role and sort of get her involved in some way. So soon to be 8 in a bit part-time position, but it's very exciting to have this sort of situation where even if someone sort of floats away for a bit of time, that we're still in their mind. We've left that sort of impact, and we must be doing something right.
I would say so. You might get a flurry of applications from people who are interested in joining you and being part of what you do. And I think what you said is so important, because it's kind of going beyond the kind of policies or that kind of compliance approach, and really thinking about what the needs are and how actually in terms of retaining talent or returning talent, how important it is to engage. That's very much part of this inclusion discussion as well. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your organisation.
Yeah, so Ankaloff, we're 10 now, I think, and we're all over, so we work remotely, which I think has its benefits, but also challenges of how you bring everyone into a company and make everyone feel like they're all part of one while working remotely. So I think we're 2.5 years old now, so I think we're still kind of working our way through that. But actually, one of the things I want to come back to, you were saying about B Corp, is I think for us, we did the B Corp process, and it's really put a magnifying glass on areas that we're not doing so well in and areas we need to improve. And it was a really good process to kind of go through, to learn from and be like, okay, how can we be better in this area? What can we do to improve? And kind of where do we need to bring in specialist skills, because we're kind of specialists in social value and modern master construction, but definitely not in other areas. So it's been a really good way for us to kind of better ourselves and question ourselves, I think. So so it's a mix.
Absolutely. critique is a really important part of the process, as well as reviewing. One of the things we do at Built by Us is work with organisations where we kind of go in and help them to understand where the gaps are, but also how they can address it through strategies and action plans. It can be something that's very difficult to hear, because lots of organisations think we're doing great, and then we go in and speak to everyone, and we have to sometimes deliver the message that actually there are a few things here that people would really like to see change, but that's very much, I think, part of the process, that you're not always going to hear what you think you might within the process. I'd like to talk a little bit about inclusion alongside environment. For me, I feel that there are sort of synergies here in terms of how we're thinking about both of these really important areas. Any comments from you about how the synergies between inclusion and climate justice, for example? Everyone looks right.
I was going to say, I feel like they are intrinsically linked, because everything we do to build environment with the built environment has an effect on people, and I think it's how we do that in a way that we can maybe be bringing in different ideas. I guess it's going back to kind of making sure we've got inclusive teams that have many different people from many walks of life, so that we can start to get new ideas, because I think we're living in a world where the way we've been working isn't quite working. So how do we start to do things differently and maybe be a bit more disruptive and listen to thoughts that aren't just an echo chamber? I think it's so important to kind of be, I guess, having those more difficult conversations so that we can actually do better.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments?
For us, I think there's a term that was used recently, wasteful inspiration.
Wasteful inspiration.
So it's sort of this idea that just because it's a good idea doesn't mean it's fit for purpose. So actually, sort of, you can have best intentions, but if it's ultimately not going to work, then you're having to remake it, whether that's an idea or a building. So it's something that's really important to us. It's from a material aspect. It's making sure that these really interesting, innovative, often mostly recycled materials are used in the right way, and actually the brief of the client that's going to be fit for its intended use, and actually that sort of sustainability and longevity as well. So it's sort of, quite often we get asked the questions like, what is the most sustainable material? And there is no single answer to that. So actually just listening, understanding the brief a little bit more, and then making sure that the connections that you make are going to be lasting ones.
Very good points. Do you have any comments that you'd like to add, Stephanie, on that?
I feel quite strongly about this, actually, just in terms of climate inclusion and about how we talk about it and the language that we use. We might talk about climate change, we might talk about, the climate crisis, but actually sometimes that isn't the right language in order to really connect and bring people forward. Like, we know as a people we are the single most important change makers, actually, in order to get ourselves into a better place. But depending who you talk to, people may not know what carbon offsetting is. They might not know what they can do to offset climate change. But if you start talking about how it can affect your life, even in terms of, this energy crisis that we're going through, now everyone wants to understand sustainable means because it's, it's cheaper. A lot of people who are, from different backgrounds are really sustainable because they have to be, like whether it's like thrift shops, charity shops, reuse of like clothing, or being less wasteful, but sometimes they're not brought on as part of this conversation of climate change because it's almost elevated in a way that isn't using plain language, and I think we do that in our sector a lot. And I think we were speaking before about, people may not know what's a public realm. It's like, it's a park, let's speak in, like language that is accessible so that everyone can feel like they're part of the conversation and then ultimately part of that change.
No, really good points. And we were chatting about this. Language is a real bugbear for me because I think it can be quite elitist. And if people don't know what it is that you're saying, they're very unlikely to feel that we can be part of that conversation. Architects, as an architect, I can say this, we are very, very guilty of this in terms of how we talk about space or the things that we want to do. But I think, again, in terms of this whole conversation about climate, about safety, about health and welfare, sometimes it feels like it's floating off. Jargon and elitist language can kind of stop people really connecting on this. Great stuff. Right, well, I think we're pretty much at our time, so I'd like to say a huge thank you to Katie, to Scott and Stephanie. If people want to find out a little bit more about you, have you got a handle they should follow?
Probably do, but I can't remember it.
Can they follow you on Instagram or Twitter or your website?
Yep, I'm pretty sure it's just at Surface Matter.
At Surface Matter, you heard it here first. Get your phones out at Surface Matter, all one word. Stephanie.
And you can find us here on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, Urban Symbiotics, because if you put Stephanie Edwards, I don't know who you'll find. But yes, that's Urban Symbiotics.
Urban Symbiotics.
Yeah.
Give you time to type that one in. I always have to think about how I'm going to spell it. My spelling is terrible. If you're looking for Built by Us, if you look for @Built by Us UK, all one word. We're on Instagram, we're also on Twitter. Have you remembered yet?
So I think if you search for Akerlof, so Akerlof, you should find us. It's a very specific name.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just before we sign off completely, just a reminder, we're going to continue working with Surface Matter. There are going to be further events coming up where we're talking about these sorts of issues around social inclusion, around design, all of this stuff. And those sessions are called Studio Social. So definitely follow us to find out more. We hope that we can see you there. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Sorry it was so hot.